Alice Keller was 28 years old, yet she felt as though life had just closed the final definitive chapter on all her grandest dreams. She sat in the cavernous, echoing waiting area of John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York City, staring blankly through a rain-streaked window at the blurry, distorted lights of ascending airplanes, while clutching a cheap plastic cup filled with lukewarm, bitter coffee. Over the past 2 grueling weeks in the massive metropolis, she had gone through 15 separate job interviews, and every single one of them had ended in a polite, rehearsed rejection. It was always the exact same phrase, delivered with a thin veneer of corporate sympathy. "You possess immense talent, but we are looking for someone with far more experience in large-scale national marketing campaigns." It felt as though her raw ability meant absolutely nothing, as if the 5 years of sleepless nights she had dedicated to her degree at the Maine College of Art in Portland were completely worthless in the face of this unforgiving, brutal job market. Alice glanced down at the glowing screen of her phone, which indicated it was 10 minutes before midnight, meaning her late-night flight back to Portland was scheduled for boarding in less than 10 minutes. This night flight represented a painful, defeating return to her grandmother's house, back to the tiny, cramped attic bedroom that she had left just a month ago, with a heart overflowing with vibrant hope. She had been utterly convinced that New York City would recognize her creative worth and finally grant her the single breakthrough chance she desperately needed to jumpstart her career. Instead, she was returning home entirely defeated, with a mere $200 left in her checking account and a heavy leather binder filled with meticulous resumes that absolutely nobody wanted to read. Deep inside her worn canvas travel bag, resting right next to 5 pristine copies of her curriculum vitae printed on expensive archival paper, lay a completely different kind of document. This hidden document was a deeply personal letter she had written 3 nights earlier at 3 o'clock in the morning in a suffocatingly small motel room in Queens, where she paid $40 a night because that was the absolute limit of what she could afford. It was certainly not a cover letter intended for any prospective corporate employer, but rather an honest, painful letter addressed entirely to herself, written amidst a torrent of quiet tears following her most devastating rejection. She had composed it while sitting cross-legged on a narrow, sagging mattress, listening to the muffled, bitter arguments of neighbors fighting over unpaid bills through the thin drywall of the motel. The raw text was titled, "Reasons Why I Will Never Return to My Grandmother's House Just to Spend My Life Packing Boxes in Her Bakery." It consisted of 12 carefully numbered reasons, written with a noticeably trembling hand during a dark moment when it felt as though her entire world was collapsing around her. The very first reason on her list read, "Because I did not spend 5 intensive years at a prestigious art institution just to operate a commercial sugar glaze machine." The 10th reason was far more intimate and painful for her to read, stating, "Because I promised my father right before he passed away that I would do something truly great with the artistic talent he gave me." Suddenly, the loud, mechanical chime of the airport intercom broke through her heavy thoughts, announcing the final boarding call for her flight. Alice stood up slowly, her body feeling twice as heavy as it had that morning, and began to navigate her way through the thick crowd of exhausted, silent travelers who were all boarding the late-night plane. She eventually found her assigned window seat in row 23, which was located deep within the cramped confines of the economy class section. She wedged her canvas bag beneath the seat in front of her, placed her leather binder of design documents carefully on her lap, and leaned her forehead against the cold, vibrating window pane as she closed her eyes in sheer exhaustion. She thought about how incredibly naive she had been to believe that simply being exceptionally skilled and genuinely loving her craft would be enough to survive in the professional world. A moment later, she felt the slight shift of weight in the adjacent seat, as a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal business suit sat down beside her, his focus entirely consumed by the glowing screen of a laptop he was already opening. He did not bother to cast a glance in her direction, which was an immense relief to Alice, who currently possessed absolutely no emotional strength or desire to engage in polite small talk with a stranger. The flight attendant walked briskly down the narrow aisle, checking seatbelts, as the main cabin lights gently dimmed to a soft blue hue, and the powerful jet engines began to emit a deep, rhythmic hum before takeoff. Alice closed her eyes once again, fully aware that the flight would last less than 2 hours, but she dreaded the morning that awaited her when her grandmother would inevitably ask how the trip went. The airplane accelerated down the runway and lifted smoothly into the night sky, but Alice was far too emotionally drained to even notice the moment the wheels left the pavement. The heavy leather binder containing her life's work remained balanced precariously on her lap, loosely held in place by her relaxed, tired fingers. Nestled safely between the professional pages of her resume was that raw, deeply emotional letter that should have never left the privacy of a desk drawer. It was a document far too honest and vulnerable for public eyes, yet she carried it with her as a fierce, necessary reminder of why she could not allow herself to give up, even when every external circumstance told her she should. The businessman sitting next to her continued to work in absolute silence, the faint click of his keyboard serving as a steady rhythm in the quiet cabin, while the plane soared through the dark clouds. As midnight passed, Alice felt her head growing increasingly heavy, her eyelids shutting tightly, as her body practically screamed for the deep rest she had denied it for the past 3 days. Gradually, without any conscious awareness, her torso began to tilt slightly to the right as the plane encountered a minor patch of high-altitude turbulence. Before she could realize what was happening, she drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, her head sliding downward until it came to rest firmly against the firm shoulder of the unknown man sitting next to her. As her body relaxed completely in sleep, her grip on the leather binder loosened, and during a sudden sharp jolt of the aircraft, the binder flipped open. Several loose pages began to slide silently out, cascading quietly down into the narrow gap between their 2 seats, entirely unnoticed by the sleeping young woman. Michael Walters noticed the stray white papers slipping past the edge of his vision, causing his fingers to instantly pause over his laptop keyboard. He looked down into the dim space between the armrests and discovered 3 distinct sheets of paper resting against his polished leather shoe, right beside the deeply sleeping woman. For a brief moment, he hesitated to reach down, because he genuinely did not want to disturb her rest. She looked entirely consumed by a profound exhaustion, her face finally free of the intense tension he had noticed when she first boarded. He carefully leaned down and gathered the scattered documents, fully intending to place them neatly back on her lap tray without looking at them. However, the top page was a professional resume that clearly displayed her name, Alice Keller, alongside a modest photograph, detailing her background as a 28-year-old graphic designer who had graduated from the Maine College of Art. Michael's eyes casually swept across her list of technical proficiencies, noting her mastery of advanced digital illustration, typography, and corporate branding, alongside 3 years of solid experience at a boutique agency in Maine. It was an impeccably structured, beautifully balanced document that immediately revealed the creator possessed a highly sophisticated understanding of visual aesthetics and design theory. The second page he had retrieved was a beautifully curated printed portfolio, showing miniature snapshots of her past projects, including a logo for a local coastal cafe and a complete visual identity for a small family bakery. Michael nodded his head in silent approval, recognizing true talent, but it was the third piece of paper that caused him to pause entirely. It was a sheet of lined paper covered in hurried, emotional handwriting, bearing the stark title, "Reasons Why I Will Never Return to My Grandmother's House, Just to Spend My Life Packing Boxes in Her Bakery." Michael knew he should immediately fold the paper and put it away, recognizing that it was an intensely private document, never meant for a stranger's eyes, yet the sheer raw honesty of the first sentence caught his attention completely. He read the second reason, which stated that her father had actually sold his beloved fishing boat just to afford her very first year of tuition, and she refused to let that massive sacrifice be for nothing. He felt a sudden, familiar tightness form deep within his chest as those words echoed a personal history he knew all too well. The third reason on the trembling page read, "Because every Thanksgiving, when I look at my father's empty chair at the dining table, I silently promise him that I will never let discouragement defeat me." Michael swallowed hard, his mind instantly racing back to his own childhood, remembering how his mother had sat alone at their kitchen table for years after his father died in a factory accident when Michael was 16. He continued to read the handwritten note, line by line, deeply moved by the profound desperation and fierce determination that coexisted within Alice's words. The eighth reason explained how a small client had recently wept with pure joy upon seeing a logo Alice had designed, claiming that her small business finally felt like it possessed a living soul. Michael smiled softly at that line, understanding perfectly that such a profound human connection was something that corporate money could never truly buy. The ninth reason stated that if she decided to quit now, the 10-year-old version of Alice, who used to stay up all night drawing under her bed covers with a flashlight, would never forgive her. At the very bottom of the 12 points was a brief postscript that read, "If you are reading this, Alice, and you are still tempted to give up, it means you have forgotten who you are. Please remember." Michael sat entirely motionless in the dim cabin, holding the emotional papers in his hands, while the young woman remained asleep against his shoulder. He knew absolutely nothing about her life beyond what was written on these pages, yet he felt a profound, rare connection to her spirit that he had not experienced in many years. This stranger had written a document that was simultaneously a heartbroken cry for help and an incredibly powerful manifesto of human resilience. He knew exactly how she felt, because 15 years ago, he had written a nearly identical list on a stained paper napkin in a cheap diner, back when he was a broke 20-year-old student living on $300 a month. Today, as the successful founder of 3 thriving technology startups and an investor with enough capital to alter the trajectory of lives, Michael Walters was holding a powerful reminder of his own humble origins. He meticulously realigned the pages, ensuring they were placed back in their exact original order, so Alice would have no reason to suspect a stranger had intruded upon her deepest secrets. He gently laid the binder back onto her lap, placing his own hand lightly over the edge for a moment, to ensure it would not slip again as the plane flew onward. He looked closely at her face in the soft light, noticing the faint lines of worry around her closed eyes and the dark shadows of exhaustion that spoke of countless sleepless nights spent chasing a dream. Michael returned his attention to his laptop, but he found it completely impossible to focus on the complex quarterly financial reports he was supposed to review before his morning meetings. His mind was already working rapidly, scanning through his vast network of professional contacts and business ventures, realizing he had just been handed a rare, beautiful opportunity to do something that truly mattered. He firmly believed that true coincidences rarely existed in life, and that a sleeping stranger, a dropped letter, and a shared flight were sometimes exactly what a person needed to remember their own purpose. However, he also recognized that when this young woman finally woke up, offering her assistance would be far more complicated and delicate than he initially anticipated. The raw words of her letter continued to echo in his thoughts, forcing him to reflect deeply on his own journey from a penniless student to a wealthy venture capitalist. He remembered his mother waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to clean downtown office buildings just to ensure he had food, and he remembered the crushing weight of his own 32 consecutive job rejections. He remembered sitting on a cold floor in a tiny apartment, weeping silently because he felt the professional world would never give a young man from a working-class background a real chance. Alice stirred slightly in her sleep, her head shifting comfortably against his shoulder, entirely unaware of the profound impact her written words were currently having on the stranger beside her. Michael remained perfectly still, refusing to move an inch, because he wanted to grant her every possible minute of peaceful rest before the plane descended into Portland. He began to plan his approach, wondering if he should be completely honest about reading the letter, or if he should simply offer her a job opportunity without any explanation. He knew that if a wealthy stranger suddenly offered her an unprompted career opportunity out of thin air, she would naturally become highly suspicious of his underlying motives. He wanted her to understand that his offer was based entirely on the undeniable talent evident in her portfolio, and the fierce strength of character revealed in her private writing. He thought of Amber Creative, a prominent graphic design firm based right in the heart of Portland that specialized in building visual identities for local businesses, a firm he had personally invested in. The company was run by a brilliant, visionary creative director named Sophia Lewis, who possessed an incredible gift for storytelling through design, and was currently searching for a talented new designer. Michael knew that Alice's profound philosophy of design, her belief that a brand should possess a genuine soul, aligned perfectly with the core values that Sophia instilled in her agency. He resolved that as soon as the plane touched down and Alice woke up, he would tell her the absolute truth regarding the letter, and offer to personally connect her with Sophia. The flight attendants began making their final cabin checks as the aircraft started its gradual descent, the dark Atlantic coastline appearing through the broken clouds below. Alice woke up with a sudden, disoriented start as the loud metallic thud of the landing gear deploying echoed through the cabin. For a few confusing seconds, she had absolutely no idea where she was, her eyes adjusting to the dim cabin lighting as she realized her face was pressed against a warm shoulder. She pulled away instantly, her face flushing with an intense, burning crimson blush as she realized she had been sleeping heavily on the elegant suit of the stranger next to her. She began to stammer out a chaotic, breathless apology, frantically trying to smooth down her messy hair while checking to see if she had accidentally ruined his expensive clothes. Michael simply offered her a reassuring, incredibly warm smile, his voice calm and entirely devoid of judgment, as he told her that no apology was necessary. Alice quickly gathered her leather binder, clutching it tightly against her chest like a protective shield, still deeply mortified by her complete lack of decorum during the flight. It was then that Michael took a deep, steadying breath, looked directly into her anxious eyes, and quietly confessed that her documents had fallen during the turbulence, and that he had read her private letter. A heavy, suffocating silence instantly fell between them as Alice stared at him with an open mouth, her initial embarrassment instantly transforming into a wave of intense humiliation. She felt an immediate, white-hot flash of anger wash over her, her fingers tightening around her binder until her knuckles turned completely white as she whispered fiercely, asking how he could possibly dare to read something so private. Michael did not flinch or become defensive. Instead, he quietly acknowledged that she had every right to be angry, but he gently implored her to listen to his story before she completely condemned his actions. He began to speak softly, sharing the raw details of his own difficult youth in an industrial town, describing a father who came home every single night, covered in soot from a grueling factory job. He told her about the devastating morning when he was 16, and 2 police officers knocked on their front door to inform his mother that his father had been killed in a massive machinery accident. He described his mother working 14-hour days, cleaning hotel rooms and selling flowers on street corners, just to ensure that Michael could stay in school and eventually become the first member of their family to attend college. He explained that when he was 20 years old, he faced 32 consecutive corporate rejections, leaving him so utterly broke that he survived entirely on cheap instant noodles while sleeping on a deflated air mattress. Alice found her anger slowly dissipating, replaced by a profound sense of shock as she listened to this wealthy, elegant man describe a reality that mirrored her own current struggles so perfectly. Michael explained how he had sat in a dimly lit diner after his final rejection, borrowed a pen from a sympathetic waitress, and written his own 10 reasons to keep fighting on a cheap paper napkin. He revealed that he still kept that framed napkin on his office desk to this day because it served as the anchor that preserved his humility and drive during times of immense success. He then looked at her with absolute sincerity, explaining that when he read her 12 reasons, It felt exactly like looking into a mirror of his own past, and his conscience simply would not allow him to walk away without offering a hand. Michael reached into his jacket pocket, withdrew an elegant, heavy business card, and gently placed it on the tray table in front of her. He introduced himself as Michael Walters, the managing partner of a prominent investment firm that specialized in funding creative and technological startups across New England. He explained that he was a major investor in Amber Creative, right there in Portland, and he offered to personally send her design portfolio directly to the owner, Sophia Lewis, for an immediate interview. Alice stared at the beautifully embossed card, her mind spinning as she tried to comprehend the sheer absurdity of the situation, wondering if this was some cruel, elaborate joke. She quietly asked why a powerful, wealthy businessman would ever do something like this for an absolute stranger without expecting something complicated in return. Michael smiled with a hint of melancholy, explaining that when he was desperately searching for his own breakthrough 15 years ago, countless people wished him luck, but absolutely nobody was willing to actually open a door for him. He had made a solemn vow to himself back then that if he ever achieved true wealth and influence, he would use his power to open doors for undiscovered talent. He assured her that this offer was not born out of pity, but out of a profound respect for her evident skill and the undeniable strength of character displayed in her writing. The plane touched down firmly on the Portland runway, the sudden braking forcing them forward slightly as the cabin lights returned to full brightness and passengers began unbuckling their belts. What Michael deliberately chose not to mention, however, was that the brilliant Sophia Lewis was not merely a business partner. She was also his former fiancée. The heavy doors of the aircraft swung open, and the passengers began shuffling out into the quiet terminal of the Portland International Jetport. Alice walked off the plane in a complete daze, the heavy business card tucked securely inside the pocket of her coat, while Michael walked beside her, carrying his sleek leather laptop bag. He stopped near the exit, turned to her one last time, and gently instructed her to go home, get a good night of sleep, and simply send him her portfolio via email if she decided to accept his assistance. Alice looked deeply into his eyes, searching for any hidden malice or deceit, but she found only the tired, genuine sincerity of a man who truly remembered what it felt like to be completely at the bottom. She watched his tall figure disappear into the night, toward a waiting car, before she finally turned to catch the late-night bus that would take her to her grandmother's house. The night bus was nearly empty as it rumbled through the quiet, familiar streets of Portland, the coastal fog rolling in off the Atlantic and blanketing the historic brick buildings in a thick white mist. Alice leaned her head against the glass, her mind filled with a chaotic whirlwind of questions, wondering if she was being incredibly foolish for letting herself feel a spark of hope once again. She walked the final 3 blocks to her grandmother's historic home, noticing the warm, welcoming amber light left burning in the kitchen window just for her. She quietly unlocked the front door and stepped into the familiar hallway, which instantly enveloped her in the comforting, nostalgic scent of sweet vanilla, fresh yeast, and her grandmother's classic lavender perfume. Her grandmother, Teresa, was sitting patiently at the kitchen table, despite the incredibly late hour, a handmade quilt wrapped around her frail shoulders, as she waited for her granddaughter's return. Teresa stood up slowly, her arthritic joints popping slightly, as she immediately wrapped her arms around Alice, asking no difficult questions, but simply providing a safe harbor for the exhausted young woman. Alice felt all the tightly wound tension and suppressed grief of the past 2 weeks completely shatter, and she began to weep softly into her grandmother's shoulder, confessing that New York had rejected her completely. Teresa gently stroked her hair, her voice a soothing balm, as she whispered that everything would look entirely different once the morning sun rose over the ocean. Alice lay awake for hours in her childhood attic room, staring up at the faded glow-in-the-dark stars she had pasted on the ceiling when she was 12, tightly clutching her phone as she drafted an email to Michael Walters. At exactly 6 o'clock in the morning, as the first pale light of dawn began to filter through her window, she took a deep breath and finally hit the send button. By noon that same day, Alice was stunned to receive a brief, professional text message from Michael, informing her that Sophia Lewis had reviewed her portfolio and wanted to meet her for an interview the following morning at 10 o'clock at the Harbor View Cafe on Commercial Street. The next morning, Alice arrived at the elegant waterfront cafe 20 minutes early, her heart pounding against her ribs as she sat by a large window overlooking the historic fishing piers. Promptly at 10 o'clock, Sophia Lewis walked through the door, exuding an aura of absolute confidence and refined elegance in a sharp, tailored trench coat, her sharp eyes scanning the room until they landed on Alice. The initial portion of the interview proceeded beautifully, with Sophia expressing genuine admiration for Alice's unique design philosophy and the profound emotional depth evident in her branding concepts. However, the entire atmosphere of the meeting shifted dramatically when Sophia casually inquired how Alice had managed to connect with a high-profile venture capitalist like Michael Walters. Alice, wanting to be entirely transparent, honestly recounted the unusual story of their shared flight, her accidental nap on his shoulder, and the dropped resume portfolio. Sophia listened in absolute silence, her expressive face gradually hardening into a cold, completely unreadable mask as she slowly closed her leather notebook with a sharp, decisive snap. She looked directly at Alice and calmly revealed that Michael Walters was her former fiancé, and that their formal wedding had been abruptly called off by him a mere week before the ceremony 3 years ago. Sophia explained coldly that while Alice's design work was undeniably exceptional, she refused to hire any staff member based on the personal recommendation of a man who had broken her heart. Alice sat frozen in her chair as Sophia paid for her untouched coffee, stood up, and firmly stated that if Alice truly wanted a position at Amber Creative, she would have to find a way to earn it entirely on her own merit, without Michael's shadow over her. Alice walked out of the cafe into a cold, biting coastal rain, her mind filled with a bitter mix of anger and absolute despair as she realized her incredible opportunity had just been destroyed by a past relationship she knew nothing about. She immediately called Michael, her voice shaking with intense fury, as she accused him of using her as a pawn in some twisted psychological game with his ex-fiancée, before slamming the phone down and blocking his number completely. She returned to her grandmother's kitchen, completely broken, and recounted the entire disastrous sequence of events while Teresa listened intently, her worn hands resting calmly on the wooden table. Teresa looked at her devastated granddaughter with eyes that had seen 80 years of life's unpredictable storms, and she quietly told Alice that sometimes, when a door is firmly shut, you cannot wait for a man to open it. You must find a way to break it down yourself. Those wise words echoed deeply within Alice's mind throughout the long, sleepless night, igniting a sudden, desperate spark of creative rebellion within her soul. The following morning, she did not look at job boards. Instead, she spent 18 hours straight studying every single public aspect of Amber Creative's brand, identifying a major flaw in their current visual identity. She realized that their corporate logo was technically proficient but entirely lacked a human soul, failing to reflect the rich coastal heritage of Maine and the passion of the local craftsmen they represented. She completely immersed herself in an unprompted, comprehensive rebranding project for Amber Creative, working tirelessly for 3 days and nights to create a breathtaking modern visual concept, inspired by the warm colors of a New England sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean. She compiled a massive, 40-page presentation that detailed a stunning new abstract logo, custom typography, and a powerful brand manifest written from the perspective of an artist who truly loved her community. On the 4th morning, she sent the massive digital file directly to Sophia Lewis's personal email address, appending a brief note stating that she wanted to prove her worth based entirely on her own labor, completely independent of Michael's influence. 2 agonizing days passed with absolute silence from the agency, leaving Alice to believe she had simply wasted her time and made herself look incredibly foolish. Late on the 3rd evening, her phone rang from an unknown local number, and upon answering, she heard Sophia's distinct professional voice instructing her to come to the Amber Creative headquarters the following day at noon. When Alice stepped into the beautiful, brick-walled creative studio the next afternoon, Emily, the polite receptionist, immediately guided her upstairs to Sophia's private office. Alice stopped dead in her tracks upon entering the room. Displayed prominently on the large digital presentation wall was her own Sunrise logo design, glowing brilliantly in the afternoon light. Sophia sat behind her desk, her expression no longer cold but filled with a profound sense of professional respect, as she invited Alice to take a seat. Sophia admitted openly that her initial instinct had been to delete the email out of spite, but the sheer brilliance, audacity, and raw passion of Alice's unprompted project had completely blown her away. She looked at Alice and stated firmly that she was offering her a 3-month paid probationary contract, emphasizing that this job belonged to Alice entirely because of her own undeniable genius and relentless drive. Alice accepted the offer with a strong, confident handshake, feeling a massive weight lift from her chest as she realized she had finally opened the door to her dream career with her own 2 hands. Over the next month, Alice worked with a furious, joyous intensity, collaborating closely with David, the firm's lead brand strategist, to deliver spectacular designs for local seafood restaurants and independent craft breweries. One quiet evening, as Alice stayed late to finalize a complex packaging design, Sophia walked into her cubicle carrying 2 warm mugs of coffee and sat down to have a genuinely honest conversation about the past. Sophia gently explained that after watching Alice work for a month, she realized her initial anger toward Michael had been entirely unfair, and she wanted to clear the air regarding their broken engagement. She revealed that Michael had actually been right to call off the wedding because they had been building a relationship based entirely on social status and business compatibility, rather than genuine emotional love. She further shocked Alice by revealing that Michael had recently invested a massive amount of capital into Amber Creative to expand their hiring budget, and he had done so without ever mentioning Alice's name, proving his motives were entirely pure. Alice felt a profound wave of regret wash over her as she realized she had deeply misjudged Michael, allowing her past professional trauma to blind her to a stranger's genuine kindness. The following Saturday afternoon, she walked out to the very end of the historic wooden pier in Portland, watching the gray Atlantic waves crash against the timeless stone breakwater while she unblocked Michael's phone number. She sent him a brief, vulnerable text message, asking if he would be willing to meet her for a cup of coffee at the old diner on Commercial Street, so she could apologize to him in person. He responded within 2 minutes, agreeing to meet her that very evening at 6 o'clock, his tone completely free of any lingering resentment or anger. When Michael walked into the warm, nostalgic diner that evening, clad in a casual jacket with his hair slightly tousled by the coastal wind, Alice felt her heart skip a beat as she looked at him with entirely new eyes. She apologized profusely for her previous angry outburst, but Michael gently caught her hand, assuring her that he completely understood why she had been suspicious of his unprompted kindness. He pulled out his phone and showed her dated emails, proving his investment in Amber Creative had been negotiated months before they ever met on that fateful flight, confirming it was never a manipulation. They sat in that cozy vinyl booth for over 2 hours, laughing and talking about their childhoods, their shared grief over losing their fathers, and the beautiful, unpredictable paths that life often forces us to walk. As the beautiful festive season of Christmas approached, the historic streets of Portland were transformed into a magical winter wonderland, adorned with thousands of twinkling white lights and the crisp scent of pine wood beering in old brick fireplaces. Alice had officially completed her probationary period with highest honors, earning a permanent position as a senior designer at Amber Creative, and she had just moved into a lovely apartment of her own. On Christmas Eve, the warm, golden light of her living room illuminated a truly beautiful scene as her beloved grandmother Teresa sat comfortably by the decorated tree, sharing stories with Michael. Hanging neatly on her office wall were 2 beautifully framed documents side by side. Her own frantic 12-reason letter, written in a dark Queen's motel room, and Michael's faded 20-year-old paper napkin from his days as a broke student in Pittsburgh. Looking back on the incredible journey that began with a moment of absolute despair at an airport, Alice realized that the greatest challenges we face in our youth are often the silent architects of our ultimate strength. When we are young, we often possess an intense, hurried desperation to achieve our goals on a specific timeline, viewing every delay as a tragedy and every rejection as a definitive verdict on our human worth. However, as the long years accumulate and the silver hair of wisdom begins to frame our perspective, we come to understand that life's most profound destinations are almost never reached via a straight, uncomplicated highway. The painful detours, the broken engagements, the closed doors, and the moments when we feel completely abandoned in the dark are frequently the very experiences that humble us, refine our character, and prepare our hearts to receive true success. If Alice had received a corporate position in New York City, she would have become just another anonymous face in a sea of marketing executives, her unique creative soul slowly eroded by the demands of national conglomerates. It was her profound failure in the metropolis that forced her onto that specific late-night flight, placing her right next to the one human being who possessed the exact life experience required to recognize her silent struggle. True human success is never measured merely by the balance of a bank account or the prestigious title printed on a corporate business card, but rather by the resilience of the human spirit to remain authentic and loving in a world that often demands cold conformity. We must learn to trust the quiet, hidden rhythm of our lives, recognizing that our personal value is never dictated by the short-sighted opinions of those who choose to close a door in our face. Sometimes, the universe requires us to experience the absolute bottom of discouragement, not to punish us, but to compel us to discover the fierce, untapped wellspring of strength that lies dormant within our own souls, waiting to be awakened. When we possess the rare courage to break down doors with our own talent, we create a destiny that is completely unshakable, because it was forged in the fire of our own relentless perseverance. As we grow older, we realize that the people who hurt us and the people who save us are often tightly interwoven in a grand, beautiful tapestry that we can only fully appreciate when we look backward from the twilight of a long life. We must always carry our own reasons to fight deep within our hearts, remembering that as long as we refuse to forget who we truly are, no failure can ever truly define us, and no night is ever too dark to prevent the inevitable arrival of a magnificent, golden sunrise.